Hello, everyone, and good morning from California. My name is Karen Bauer, and I am the Regional Educational Advising Coordinator for the Middle East, South, and Central Asia with the organization EducationUSA. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you all and to share a bit about the United States and what has been happening this past year when it comes to the global pandemic and U.S. institutions' response. Can we please move to the next slide? I will also mention before I go into the presentation, and I think all of you can probably echo these sentiments, that this has been such a unique year, such a unique journey, and I firmly believe that our high school colleges, our teachers, our U.S. admission reps have never worked so hard before than we have now. I think that concept of working from home definitely has been blown out of the water as being an easier thing to do. And I have been so impressed over the past year at the resilience of students, parents, teachers, and our U.S. colleges and universities to maintain connection and communication to keep students interested in studying abroad and coming to the United States. As many of you know, we have over 4,000 colleges and universities. We like to say that we have a fit for everyone, given the vastness of our country and the different types of educational experiences that students can come and attend at our U.S. institutions. And so there's a lot of flexibilities with our degrees. There are a lot of different price points and experiences that students can have. I know that predominantly I'm speaking to an audience where many of you are at the undergraduate level, and we really do see that flexibility. I think it's important when you talk about the United States to first talk about the numbers and how many international students are in the United States. There is the Open Doors report that some of you might be familiar with that comes out during International Education Week. We just released the last report, and it's produced by the Institute of International Education and the U.S. Department of State through the Bureau of Education and Cultural Exchange. So we had a little over 1 million international students studying in the United States at all levels. This also includes occupational practical training, which is the opportunity for international students to have a work experience after their degree program. Next slide. Great. And if we look at the numbers of students from around the world that come to the United States, we definitely have seen an increase in different pockets and places like Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. But really the bulk of the students coming to the United States are from two countries, China and India, with 53% of those students from those two countries that make up students coming to our shores. Next slide, please. And so, so you can really see that for 5 years, we've seen growth. We've gone over the 1 million mark. Most of the students that study in the United States are at the undergraduate level, but we do break those numbers down. So it's really important when you're looking at the United States and we're looking at what has happened in the past and going in the future, that you take a look at the Open Doors report and you really use it, even if you're a high school counselor, to your benefit. There are tons of resources on the website to really look at what those student mobility trends have been over the past few years. And as we go into uncharted territory, what they will be and what some of those predictions might be for the countries that you are working in, or if you're a U.S. institution, the countries that you are trying to build recruitment plans with. All right, next slide, please. Great. So, in addition to the Open Doors report, there is a new report that has also been released by the Institute of International Education, which is a snapshot on international student enrollment in the United States. This is a new type of report and the report was basically compiled where we surveyed over 700 institutions between the months of September and October, really in these unprecedented times, to figure out what is happening on their campuses and how we can predict what is to come. So I highly recommend, I'm just going to highlight some of the different aspects of the report that you will see. There's a few images here, but if you really want to do a deeper dive in what's happening in the United States, I highly recommend going to the IAEE website and downloading the report. The great news is 99% of institutions across the United States offered online instruction. And I think many of you can agree that it really varied prior to COVID as the type of online instruction that was available. And over this past year, we've just seen so many different platforms, different ways of reaching students, and very unique models of how we can connect around the world to our classrooms, especially given we have so many different variety of time zones and different really classes and disciplines that our students are reaching into. So very few have a physical presence, but really everybody jumped on board and online. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so we had a 16% decrease in the number of international students studying in the United States in the fall of 2020. I think that although the numbers were quite robust, in the previous years, just given the current situation, that we can expect those numbers will go down in different pockets, but really our goal is how do we mitigate to keep those numbers up. 90% of the institutions that we surveyed said that students, over 40,000 students, decided to defer their future studies. So what we see is while students are engaged online, and are continuing their studies, when they want to actually come to the United States, or for that matter in other countries, they really want that physical component. And so they're looking to, fill their time as best as possible as we're kind of in this interim and going through this pandemic experience, but really want to get on campus, and so have decided to defer. It's a little hard to see the screen below, or the box below, but it basically talks about how institutions are providing services to students, whether that's IT support, whether that's helping them with, somebody just mentioned something about learning disabilities, those other in-person components that you have on a campus, and really universities kind of rising to that occasion. So you'll see those different categories there in trying to create that in-person experience. Next slide, please. Great. There also has been a lot of concern too about cost, and students really looking at different price points and if institutions are providing aid. So you'll see in the upper right hand corner that a lot of institutions are still providing some type of financial support to students, or taking into consideration that given a pandemic and given the different aspects of change in the economy, of how can we fit students' needs. So all of these things, taking these things into consideration when students are looking to the U.S. I think a very unique aspect is that for once, institutions in the U.S. have really looked in our backyard and looked to recruit not just abroad, but also looking at boarding schools, looking at English language programs, students who are already physically in the United States, and how can we help them in their next steps as they look at higher education after secondary school. So that chart below kind of really breaks down the different markets and different recruitment plans from U.S. universities. Next slide, please. And of course, how we reach students is quite different. So, of course, using those traditional models, building on those connections when representatives were on the ground, using their current students, using alumni, sharing alumni stories, social media. Of course, we know the popular platforms in our own countries like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, but also looking at different platforms and how we can engage. Our Education USA offices, which I'm a part of, that are across the country, or across the globe. We have, over 500 Education USA advising centers where, even though we can't meet physically in person, we have those advisors on the ground to help answer questions, whether it's in country or with our U.S. institutions. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and have you, this is just a verbal write-up of some of the different charts that I talked about, and I know we're going to share the presentation with you all, so we can go on to the next slide. Okay, one more, next slide. Great. So working together on a pandemic response. Next slide. Okay. And next slide, because I know I don't have much time. Great. So campuses really, if you've been watching the news, and I just got to the United States about a week ago, different parts of our very large country are at different stages when it comes to the pandemic, and really looking at safety concerns as it relates to our communities and as it relates to our campuses. But institutions are really making sure that students are safe and trying to work with what is best for them and where they are at. These are 3 different examples of different parts of the country, from Florida to UC San Diego to the University of Michigan, and how they have responded to the COVID pandemic. So at times, Florida Institute, they had students stay on campus when it was, too difficult to go home. UC San Diego created a student virtual union. That was another example. And then the University of Michigan, for undergraduate students on campus, plan to increase their asymptomatic testing for members of the campus community. So as we can see, with a very large country, we are really looking at different ways, depending on our campus communities, to how we can support students, whether they're in person or online. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of another statistic of U.S. higher education systems of where we are at in reopening our institutions. So you can primarily see we have some students that are going back to campus, but many are still looking at the online options or hybrid options as we work for a vaccine and as we try to make sure that everybody is safe. So we still are in that limbo stage, as I think the rest of the world is too. Next slide, please. There is a lot of questions about how students can come to the United States when the time is right. So many of our embassies and consulates took preventative measures and closed their visa services, but we have seen an opening up, and we have seen over the past few months that it is now possible to have the opportunity to come in and get a student visa depending on the country. So I highly recommend, depending on where you're at in the world, to really pay attention to the embassy and the consulate websites, what's being published on those websites, what's being published on the State Department websites, follow our social media, keep in touch with our Education USA centers, as well as our consular sections, as the information is evolving and changing. And those are really the best places you can go to for information when the time is right for your students to apply for a student visa and to physically come to the United States, whether that might be in the few months to come or maybe later on in the spring or the summer. That's the place to go. Next slide. All right, next slide. I'm going to have you go to the very last slide, because I know I'm a bit off for time. And we will share this presentation. There's a lot of more information here, so please definitely do take the opportunity to look at our fact sheets, our different open doors numbers and things that are put out by Education USA and IIE. But looking ahead, there are a lot of resources that are out there. This is the time more than ever to keep in touch with professional organizations like IC3, like CIS, like NAFSA and NACAC. Going to their websites, keeping abreast, because the changes are happening so frequently. Understanding what's happening with testing for the United States, with things like the ACT, the College Board, IELTS, Duolingo. It's very difficult now, obviously, to test in person. Many institutions have changed their testing requirements. They're being more flexible with their admission requirements. So understanding what those are so that you can help your students is very, very important. And then just knowing that there's a wealth of information with different popular sources like the Chronicle of Higher Education, Karen Fisher's Latitudes, PI, in the Inside of Higher Education, Education USA, and just a number of other things. And the factors will be delivery, our location, if there will and when there will be a vaccine, and meeting students where they are at. So I know I'm probably up for time right now. They will share this PowerPoint presentation with you. Please reach out to me. My email, I'll go ahead and type it in the comments, and our Education USA advisors around the world that are on the ground and wanting to help you and assist your students in studying in the United States. Thank you so much for this opportunity.